It has been 60 years since Singin' in the Rain first appeared, the movie that makes everyone feel like dancing, and it was made by the greatest director of that musical era, Stanley Donen.
After 70 years, the dark truth about Singin' in the Rain finally comes out. MGM's most beloved musical was built on stolen songs, covered-up injuries, and brutal abuse. Gene Kelly kissed 19-year-old Debbie Reynolds so forcefully she ran screaming. Donald O'Connor nearly died filming Make 'Em Laugh. And most shocking of all, the studio buried evidence of racism, censorship, and a scandal that would have destroyed Hollywood's golden age. Today, the photos they tried to hide have finally surfaced. MGM didn't make Singin' in the Rain because they had a great story. They made it because Arthur Freed needed to make money off a pile of old songs no one cared about anymore. Freed had been a lyricist before becoming a producer, and back in 1929, he co-wrote the song Singin' in the Rain with composer Natio Herb Brown. Over the years, they had written more than 100 songs for MGM musicals, but most of them were stuck in forgotten films from the 1930s. By 1951, MGM's musical division wasn't pulling in the profits it used to, and Freed came up with a way to fix that. Make a film that required using those old songs. Instead of paying for new music, they could just recycle what they already owned. Freed basically invented the jukebox musical before anyone knew what that was. Most of the songs in the movie weren't written for it. Good Morning had been used before. Make 'Em Laugh was a straight-up rip-off of Cole Porter's Be a Clown from 1948. It was so obvious that even director Stanley Donen admitted it was 100% plagiarism. But Freed had enough power to keep any lawsuits away. Even the songs from his own catalog weren't safe. Fit as a Fiddle was dragged out of obscurity and reused without crediting its original co-writers. MGM spent $2.54 million on the film, which is around $30 million today. But they weren't throwing money around. They reused sets and costumes from An American in Paris to save cash. And in 1970, MGM literally dumped 8.5 tons of old Freed Brown sheet music under a golf course in Los Angeles to get out of paying taxes. Freed's biographer later called Singin' in the Rain a tax write-off disguised as art. The original plan for the movie was completely different. The lead role of Don Lockwood was written for Howard Keel, who was one of MGM's biggest stars at the time. Back then, the story was about a silent film Western star who struggled when movies switched to sound. It was perfect for Keel, but he clashed with Freed over the script and demanded more money. Freed refused and fired him. That's when they brought in Gene Kelly. But there was a problem. Kelly wasn't a Western star. He was a dancer. They had to throw out everything and rewrite the script to fit him. Instead of a cowboy, Lockwood became a song and dance man. Since Kelly was great at physical comedy, they also added a lot more slapstick. Then there was Cosmo Brown. Comden and Green wrote the role for their friend Oscar Levant, a pianist and actor known for sarcastic, witty humor. But Kelly hated him. He wanted Donald O'Connor instead. By the time Levant showed up for rehearsals in September 1950, the role was already taken. No one had even told him. He walked off set furious and later called Kelly a control freak with the charm of a tax auditor. Debbie Reynolds had it much harder. She was 19, had zero dance training, and Gene didn't even want her in the film. MGM's top boss ignored him and cast her anyway. That meant she had to survive Kelly's brutal rehearsals. For 3 months, she trained non-stop, sometimes 14 hours a day. During the Good Morning number, she danced until her feet bled through her tap shoes. She kept crying between takes, but Kelly kept yelling for her to go again. Things got worse when it came time to film their first kiss in March 1951. It wasn't just a simple kiss. Kelly forcefully kissed her, slipping in his tongue without warning. Reynolds was horrified. In her 2013 memoir, Unsinkable, she called it an assault and said she ran around yelling for Coca-Cola to wash out her mouth. Studio records confirm that after this, she demanded a closed set for all romantic scenes. Years later, Kelly admitted, "I wasn't very nice to Debbie. I'm surprised she still speaks to me." The power imbalance was obvious. Reynolds made only $300 a week, while Kelly was making $12,500. The whole experience left deep scars. In a 1996 interview, Reynolds said, "Singin' in the Rain and childbirth were the two hardest things I ever did." Fred Astaire saved her. One day, he found her sobbing under a piano and took her aside. He taught her how to handle the pressure. "You're not going to die," he told her. "If you're not sweating, you're not doing it right." Even after all that effort, the studio still didn't trust her voice. They brought in Debbie Reynolds to dub her singing in 2 songs. The irony? Her entire character arc was about dubbing someone else. Years later, she admitted she had no idea how brutal Hollywood could be. The blood-stained shoes she wore in Singin' in the Rain are still in a museum today. Donald O'Connor's suffering might have been worse. His most famous scene in Singin' in the Rain almost destroyed him. He was only 27 when he filmed Make 'Em Laugh, a number packed with flips, falls, and stunts that pushed his body to its limit. O'Connor was a heavy smoker, 4 packs a day, and his lungs were already weak. Over 2 days, he threw himself into 45 falls, ran up walls, and flipped onto a hard concrete floor. The most dangerous move, where he ran up a wall and flipped backward, was something he had done before in vaudeville. But now it was much harder. His body wasn't the same. After the first take, his feet and ankles were covered in bruises. He vomited from exhaustion. Then the worst thing happened. The footage was ruined because of a camera problem. He had to do the entire routine again the next day. When filming finally ended, O'Connor collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital, completely drained. Some say he was there for 3 days. Others say a full week. He had exhaustion, trouble breathing, and burns from the rough carpet. MGM blamed it on his smoking, trying to downplay how brutal the scene had been. But Rita Moreno, his co-star, later revealed the truth. He had cracked ribs too. Despite all this, when O'Connor finally returned to set, Gene Kelly told him they needed more takes. Years later, O'Connor laughed about it, saying, "I thought I'd have to commit suicide for the ending." The pain in that scene was real, and that's why it remains one of the most unforgettable moments in Hollywood history. Jean Hagen's story is pure Hollywood irony. She played Lena Lamont, the silent film star with a voice so bad it had to be dubbed. But in real life, Hagen had a beautiful, trained voice. In the movie's final twist, when Lena is caught lip-syncing, it's not Debbie Reynolds' voice coming out of her mouth. It's Hagen's real voice, hidden in plain sight. And it gets even weirder. Debbie Reynolds dubbed Reynolds' singing because the studio thought Hagen's voice was too good to pass for Reynolds dubbing Lena. It was all layers on top of layers. Hagen actually hated musicals, but she knew how to play the game. She based Lena's voice on Judy Holliday's performance in Born Yesterday, winning the role by screeching, "I'm a shimmering star," at her audition. She nailed the comedy, even got an Oscar nomination, but Kelly wasn't happy. He thought she stole too many scenes from him. Her career slowed down after Singin' in the Rain, but her performance is still one of the smartest jokes Hollywood ever pulled. Gene Kelly wasn't just the lead in Singin' in the Rain. He ran the show. He co-directed, choreographed, and made sure the film reflected his vision. He wanted Don Lockwood to feel like a real guy, athletic, charming, and sharp on his feet. The famous Singin' in the Rain scene? That was all him. The studio didn't want to shoot it with real water, but Kelly wouldn't budge. The scene was filmed over 3 brutal days in July 1951. Kelly had a 103-degree fever, but he refused to stop. He was soaked for 10 hours a day, standing under freezing water pumped from overhead pipes. His wool suit shrank right on his body, forcing costume designers to stretch it out between takes. But none of that mattered. He had to get it right. The set was a nightmare. MGM was using so much water that Culver City faced a shortage, so they had to film in the mornings before residents started watering their lawns. Between takes, Kelly wasn't resting. He was lying under burning hot lights, trying to sweat the fever out of his body. The rain made the ground slippery, but he still pulled off dangerous stunts like leaping onto a lamppost and tap dancing through deep puddles. The iconic umbrella spin? That was never planned. In fact, the handle broke mid-scene, almost ruining the take. The cameras made everything worse. They were massive and couldn't handle low light, so the crew had to blast the stage with hundreds of lights just to make the rain show up on film. The heat was unbearable. John Hagen passed out twice. Donald O'Connor was covered in heat rashes because his wool tuxedo trapped sweat. Props melted, glass shattered, and the crew had to replace entire set pieces daily. The Broadway melody sequence alone cost a fortune. The intense lights burned holes in the fake buildings. The cameras were too big to move properly, so dance numbers had to be filmed in wide shots because close-ups weren't an option. The whole Technicolor process was a nightmare. After shooting Wrapped, they realized Debbie Reynolds' dress had turned the wrong color on film. Fixing that mistake alone delayed the movie for weeks. Moreover, on the set, there was a stuntman named Russ Saunders, but instead of making things safer, he somehow made things even riskier. He was a gymnast and diving champion, brought in to do the most dangerous moves for O'Connor and Kelly. But one accident after another meant the stars had to do their own stunts. In the fit as a fiddle number, Saunders was supposed to jump from a moving trolley onto a platform. He miscalculated and shattered his leg. O'Connor had no choice but to do it himself, and he nailed it in one try. Saunders kept getting hurt. During rehearsals for the Broadway melody sequence, he was supposed to lift Sid Charisse, but he dropped her. Gene Kelly had to step in. Even basic stunts went wrong. In one simple slip and fall, Saunders broke his wrist, and once again, O'Connor had to improvise. By the end of filming, Saunders had racked up 6 serious injuries. Kelly and O'Connor ended up doing 90% of their own stunts. Director Stanley Donen later joked that they should have just insured Saunders as a crash test dummy. Sid Charisse had her own near disaster. In the Broadway Melody Ballet, she danced with a flowing silk scarf that stretched 50 feet long. To make it float beautifully, the crew used 4 massive airplane engines from World War II bombers. The scarf weighed 15 pounds, and the wind from the engines made it incredibly difficult to control. It kept getting caught on the lights, ruining take after take. Then, something terrifying happened. The scarf wrapped around Charisse's neck. The engines kept pulling, tightening the fabric. She couldn't breathe. Crew members had to rush in and cut her free before she was seriously hurt. But the trouble didn't end there. The whole scarf setup caused chaos. The fabric had to be custom-made, costing MGM $12,000, worth about $140,000 today. The wind from the engines was so strong that ceiling tiles came loose and crashed down, injuring 2 crew members. Charisse was still recovering from childbirth, and during one take, she dislocated her shoulder, fighting against the pull of the scarf. Later, she said, "I felt like a kite in a hurricane." Even when they finally got a good take, there was another problem. At one point, the scarf slipped, accidentally revealing Charisse's midriff. The censors almost cut the whole scene for being indecent. The editors scrambled to fix it, splicing frames together to hide the moment. If you watch closely at 1:22:3 in the final film, you can see an awkward jump in the footage. That's where they had to patch it up. The biggest censorship fight in Singin' in the Rain happened in the Broadway melody ballet scene, especially during the vamp dance with Gene Kelly and Sid Charisse. This part was supposed to show a seductive moment between Kelly's dancer character and Charisse's mysterious woman linked to the mob. But during rehearsals, the Catholic Legion of Decency and the Production Code Administration, PCA, stepped in. They had a problem with a move where Charisse wrapped her legs around Kelly's waist. They called it morbidly sensual and indecent. The PCA, led by Joseph Breen, said it broke the code's rule against suggestive postures that could stimulate the lower and baser element. The exact shot that got cut is unknown today, but in the final film, there's a strange jump cut at 1:22:3. In that moment, Charisse suddenly moves from being wrapped around Kelly to standing several feet away. The music also skips a beat. This happened because MGM had to reshoot the scene on July 23, 1951. It cost them $12,500, which would be about $145,000 today. Censors also didn't like Charisse's costume because the slit showed too much of her thigh. So designer Walter Plunkett had to add lining to cover it up. The scene was meant to show the dark, seductive side of Hollywood, but the edits took away most of its meaning. Instead of being a powerful symbol of corruption, Charisse's character became just another part of the plot. Ironically, this censorship reflected the film's own message. Just like Lena Lamont's voice was changed to make her more acceptable, Gene Kelly's artistic vision was also controlled by outside forces. The filmmakers couldn't talk about this openly because doing so might have led to even more censorship. The film's central joke was about Kathy Selden, played by Debbie Reynolds, secretly dubbing the voice of Gene Hagen's character, Lena Lamont. But there was another hidden layer to this. Reynolds herself was dubbed by a singer named Betty Noyes. In April 1952, MGM decided that Reynolds' voice wasn't strong enough for the songs Would You and You Are My Lucky Star. Musical director Lenny Hayton thought her voice was too shrill, so Noyes recorded the songs instead. She did it in 3 takes on April 12, 1952, earning $750, which was more than Reynolds' weekly salary of $300. MGM tried to keep this a secret. Even in the scene where Kathy records Lena's dialogue, Reynolds' voice wasn't used. Instead, the filmmakers had Jean Hagen do it herself. Director Stanley Donen explained that Reynolds had a terrible Midwestern twang, while Hagen had a more refined voice, which was what a 1920s starlet should sound like. This created a strange situation where Hagen was dubbing Reynolds, who was dubbing Hagen's character. MGM kept this quiet until 1975 because they thought it would ruin the film's clever storyline. But when That's Entertainment 3 came out in 1994, it included a deleted scene of Reynolds singing You Are My Lucky Star. Fans were shocked to hear her real voice. It was much lighter and weaker than Noyes' version. Reynolds later admitted she felt bitter about it. In her 1988 memoir, she wrote, "I felt cheated. Betty got my Oscars." Noyes, who passed away in 1987, was never officially credited, until the film's 2002 DVD release. The original ending of Singin' in the Rain was much darker. In early drafts of the script, Don Lockwood's career was destroyed after the dubbing scandal. In this version, he ends up drunk in a movie theater in 1932, watching his old silent films and muttering, "Nobody wants phonies, not even me." This was inspired by real-life actors like John Gilbert, whose career ended when talkies exposed his high-pitched voice. When MGM showed the film to test audiences in March 1952, people hated this ending. They had already lived through the Great Depression and didn't want to watch a sad movie. One person wrote on a comment card, "We suffered through the Depression. We don't need more sadness." MGM listened and reshot the ending in May 1952. They added the famous billboard scene, which cost $48,000 to film. However, a small piece of the original ending survived. A 30-second shot of Don staring at a flickering projector was repurposed for the Dueling Cavalier screening. Rita Moreno also had a tough time on set. She played Zelda Zanders, a minor role that she filmed in just 9 days in April 1951. She had a solo number called "I've Got a Feelin' You're Foolin'," which poked fun at Hollywood nepotism. She spent 3 weeks rehearsing, but in the end, the number was cut for pacing. A leaked 1994 tape from rehearsals shows Moreno improvising a flamenco-inspired routine, but Kelly rejected it, saying it was too ethnic. She was heartbroken. "I cried for days. They reduced me to a gossipy cameo," she later said. She was already facing discrimination in Hollywood, and this only made it worse. Even though she earned more than Reynolds, $750 a week compared to $300, MGM publicity photos often cropped her out. In her 2021 memoir, Rita Moreno, she revealed that Kelly made fun of her Puerto Rican accent on set, joking, "Stick to dancing, Rosita." For years, the studio buried her contributions. It wasn't until 2016, during a special Academy screening, that her deleted scenes were finally restored. The toll this film took on stars was horrifying. Years later, Reynolds joked that making Singin' in the Rain was just as painful as giving birth. But it wasn't just exhausting. It left her with injuries that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She developed chronic foot pain and burst blood vessels, and doctors warned that if she kept going, her career could end right there. But the studio didn't care. They covered it up and forced her back on set the next day. Even Kelly admitted he was hard on her, saying it was a miracle she still spoke to him. Reynolds pushed through, becoming a Hollywood legend, but her feet never recovered. It was a perfect example of how the industry treated young stars. If they wanted success, they had to suffer for it. Gene Kelly's personal life was just as complicated as his career. He had married Betsy Blair in 1941, when she was only 17, and for a while, their life seemed perfect. She had met him at an audition and thought he was just a waiter. But as Kelly's career took off, things started falling apart. During Singin' in the Rain, Blair got caught up in Hollywood's political paranoia. She had left-wing beliefs, and that was dangerous at the time. MGM's boss, Louis B. Mayer, told Kelly to convince her to denounce communism, or else he would be fired. She refused. The pressure was too much for their marriage. Blair later said that Kelly wanted her to stay the same innocent girl he had married, but she was changing. By 1954, they had separated, and after their divorce in 1957, she moved to Europe and remarried. Kelly, however, never really let go of his resentment. The irony was that while his marriage was falling apart, he had already started seeing someone else. His future wife, Jean Coyne, who had been working as his assistant choreographer on Singin' in the Rain. Donald O'Connor's time on Singin' in the Rain was just as painful, but in a different way. His big solo number, Make 'Em Laugh, was an incredible performance. He flipped off walls, did pratfalls, and threw himself around like he had no bones in his body. But it nearly killed him. He was a 4-pack-a-day smoker. Years later, the damage caught up with him. By the 1970s, he was using nitroglycerin pills to keep up his energy. He had a heart attack in 1971. And by the late 70s, his health had completely fallen apart. Smoking had ruined his lungs, and alcohol made things worse. In 2003, at 78 years old, he died of heart failure. His daughter later said his last words were a joke. He wished he could thank the Academy for the Lifetime Achievement Award he never got. He had given Hollywood one of the greatest performances ever, but the price was his body, his health, and eventually, his life. Warner Brothers released a 4K Ultra HD restoration of Singin' in the Rain in 2022 for its 70th anniversary, and it revealed some surprising secrets. The restoration used the original Technicolor negatives and old prints, bringing back details that had been missing for decades. One big discovery was 17 missing frames in the Broadway Melody Ballet scene with Gene Kelly and Sid Charez. Fans had long suspected something was cut, and now it was confirmed. The missing frames showed Charisse's leg slipping during a complicated lift, which the filmmakers had hidden by making a sudden cut. The 4K scan also showed tiny sweat droplets on Kelly's face while performing the famous Singin' in the Rain scene. This detail proved just how sick he was at the time. He had a 103-degree fever, but kept dancing anyway. Another shocking reveal was a censored scene from the 1952 release. A 23-second part of the Vamp dance, where Charisse wraps her leg around Kelly's torso, had been removed because the Catholic Legion of Decency thought it was too suggestive. The original footage was found in an old nitrate print stored at UCLA and was put back in the 4K version. The restoration also debunked a long-time myth about the rain scene. Many believed that milk was mixed with the water to make the rain more visible, but Technicolor records proved it was actually done to make the rain reflect studio lights better. The new high-resolution scan also fixed mistakes from older restorations. Previous versions had oversaturated skin tones because of faded magenta dye in 1970s prints. Now, the colors looked more natural. One surprising detail was Kelly's facial scar, which had always been airbrushed out in DVD releases. In the new version, it was clear for the first time. Then, in 2023, a collection of rare Singin' in the Rain memorabilia appeared as NFTs, and it caused a huge scandal. A total of 47 items were sold on OpenSea, shocking collectors. One of the most talked-about pieces was Debbie Reynolds' blood-stained tap shoes, which she wore while filming Good Morning. The shoes, size 6B, sold for $12.5 Ethereum, about $23,000. Medical records confirmed that Reynolds' feet bled for 3 days after filming the grueling routine. Another item was Gene Kelly's fever chart from April 15, 1951, showing his temperature at 103.8 degrees Fahrenheit while filming the Singin' number. Nurse notes even revealed that he vomited between takes, and MGM doctors had to give him adrenaline shots so he could keep going. The NFT collection also included censored script pages, showing scenes that had been removed for being too controversial. One deleted subplot had Lena exposing the unfair pay gap between men and women. She would have revealed that actresses earned $750 a week, while Kelly was making $5,000. Among the most disturbing finds were never-before-seen 35mm frames showing racial segregation on set. One shocking photo revealed that black backup dancers, who were uncredited and paid only $3 a day, were separated from white performers during the Beautiful Girl number. Warner Brothers tried to stop the NFTs from being sold, claiming copyright issues, but because they were on the Ethereum blockchain, the files spread too quickly to be taken down. In her final interview in December 2016, just days before her fatal stroke, Debbie Reynolds spoke to Turner Classic Movies about Singin' in the Rain. She said, "I'd never do it again, but I'm proud we made history." She was referring not just to the movie, but also to the pain it caused her. The film had left her with chronic arthritis, and she later needed 2 hip replacements, one in 1985 and another in 1999. In 2001, she revealed that during the "You Were Meant for Me" number, she had hidden Valium in her gloves to help her deal with Kelly's harsh treatment. Even though filming had been difficult, she still fought to keep the movie alive. She donated $500,000 to help restore the film in 2012 and recorded the Blu-ray commentary just weeks before she passed away. Her final words to her daughter, Carrie Fisher, were heartbreaking. She said, "I want to be with Carrie." Medical records later revealed that she died from broken heart syndrome, a rare condition caused by extreme grief. It was a tragic ending that mirrored Singin' in the Rain in a way. Just like Kathy Selden's voice was taken from her in the film, Reynolds' own voice and strength were worn down over the years.